What has been going on with the murder trial so far? There's a lot of information to parse through, a lot of witness testimonies, a lot of things that have been said left and right, and it's so much to remember. But I'll remind you.
Explain that to the jury. Why? What had changed after this terrible tragedy?
Nice people get good verdicts. If Alec is the victim of a vigilante, nobody's going to hold him accountable. The case would be over against Alec.
Because people think he did this in order to get sympathy, in order to get out of other things that he was in trouble for, or potentially even liable for. Now, I did want to talk about this because I thought Alex's motivation was potentially cashing in the life insurance of Maggie and Paul, but we do learn this.
Was there any life insurance for Maggie or Paul?
I don't believe there was any life insurance on anybody, including Alec.
So that does go back to me potentially thinking he just wanted sympathy. He wanted pity. And that was Mark Tinsley, by the way. Mark Tinsley represented the defendants of the boat case, the one that Paul was involved with, where it resulted in the death of Mallory Beach. Next, we have is a testimony of Blanca, housekeeper for the Murdaughs, and she was fairly pretty close with Maggie. She worked with her with many years.
She told me, she said, Alec wants me to come home. And she kind of sounded like she didn't want to come home, and because she really liked being at Edisto, and they had a lot of work that was going on, and she was trying to make sure everything was ready. And he said Alec had told Paul to come and fix it because they were planning on having a hunt that weekend, so he wanted everything ready and good to go. Alec
initially told investigators that he didn't know that Maggie was going to show up there, but lo and behold, we find out that he asked Paul and Maggie to show up at the Moselle property.
After June 7th of 2021, did you ever see this Sperry boat used again?
No, sir, I do not recall seeing him in the closet.
During the month of August, do you remember him having a conversation with you about a shirt?
Yes, sir.
Did you find that to be unusual?
Yes, sir. There's a video. There was a video that was out. I hadn't seen a video. And he said, you remember the shirt I was wearing, that Vinnie Vine shirt? That's what he said to me. In my mind, I was saying, I don't remember Vinnie Vines. I didn't say anything, but I was kind of thrown back because I don't remember that. I don't remember him wearing that shirt that day. And then I know what he was wearing the day he left the house, and I was basically confused. I didn't really know whether he was trying to get me to say that shirt, if I was to be asked that if that was a shirt he was wearing.
After the murders?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Alec came over and was inquiring of you what shirt he had on that day, correct?
It didn't feel like he was inquiring. It felt more like he was trying to convince me of the shirt that he was wearing.
Paul takes a snapshot roughly about an hour before the murders would have happened. And in that video, well, Alex is wearing a completely different outfit than what he had at the crime scene. They don't know what happened to that shirt. I don't believe law enforcement ever got a hold of them. And again, here is Alex potentially trying to coerce a witness to saying something different, similar to what he tried to do with Miss Shelley.
Vacuum underneath the driver's side seat, I found her ring.
Or what?
Her ring. Her wedding band. She said she knew the amount of money that they were asking, but she felt that Alec was not being truthful to her with regard to what exactly was going on with that lawsuit.
Now, why would Maggie's wedding ring be found underneath her car seat? That's not where you keep wedding rings. Blanca's testimony is showing that maybe things weren't so great in the Murdaugh household after all.
Agent Wilde, you were asked by Mr. Barber whether you've been able to pinpoint two phones together in other cases, correct?
Yes.
Generally speaking, what kind of data are you using when you have been able to pinpoint two phones together at the same time?
I mean, first of all, the two phones have to have activity around the same time. So we'd have to have calls at 9 o'clock on one phone and calls at 8:58, 9 o'clock on the next phone. That's the first thing we'd have to do. Second thing is it'd have to be indication the phones are traveling together or stationary at the same place at the same time.
Okay. And after 7:50 p.m., was there any Verizon location tower information provided by Verizon?
There was not on Maggie Murdaugh's phone. There was not.
So you wouldn't be able to provide any opinion as to whether her phone was near any other phone in the world after 7:50 p.m., correct?
That's correct, because there's no data to compare it against.
Okay.
Our next witness is Matthew Tutton, and he worked at PMPD with Alex, and he was also a really close friend with Paul Murdaugh. And he's going to reaffirm what I was thinking. If Maggie went home to be with Alex because his parents were sick, well, wouldn't she have wanted to go to see his mom as well? And if she was missing Alex's phone calls, well, why didn't he just stop by the kennel to pick her up?
If you all were spending time down at the kennels and someone was leaving the house, would it be common for them that someone, whether it's, Alex or Maggie, to stop by on their way out, leaving the property?
Yes, sir.
That would be what would normally happen?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear voices on that video that we just played?
I did.
Whose voices did you hear?
Paul Murdaugh's, Maggie Murdaugh's, and Alec Murdaugh's.
And again, referencing a video that Paul probably took minutes before he died with Alex Murdaugh at the kennel. His voice is in the background. So many family members, so many friends have identified his voice. Honestly, these next testimonies with the DNA analysis, the serology forensics, It was hard to parse out. It was very confusing, but here's what we got so far. So there's potential blood on the steering wheel of Alex Murdaugh's car.
They are all swabs that were taken from the Chevy Suburban.
And can you tell us what kind of testing was done on those swabs?
So it appears that these swabs were collected because they were Blue Star positive, which to my understanding is a presumptive test used by the crime scene unit to indicate areas of possible blood staining.
They were able to find that it was a mixture of Alex's DNA and Maggie's as well.
They were submitted as 2 swabs of suspected blood collected from the steering wheel of the Chevy Suburban.
And based on the comparisons you made, were any individuals included?
For the comparison to Margaret Murdaugh, the result is the DNA profile is approximately 35 times more likely if Margaret Murdaugh and an unidentified, unrelated individual contributed to the mixture than if 2 unidentified, unrelated individuals contributed to the mixture. For the comparison to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, the result is the DNA profile is approximately 100 quadrillion times more likely if Richard Alexander Murdaugh and an unidentified, unrelated individual contributed to the mixture than if 2 unidentified, unrelated individuals contributed to the mixture. So think about like 2 people singing the same song. If one person is singing really quietly and another person is singing loudly, when they're singing together, it'll sound really loud because that one person is already singing loudly by themselves. But that doesn't mean that the person who was singing quietly is suddenly singing very loudly. So we're trying to account for the difference in the weight of the result. And so it's just more accurate when considering that person who is a lower level or has a lower likelihood ratio to consider their individual likelihood ratio rather than the combined likelihood ratio.
They were able to test a stain on Alex's shirt. They found Alex and Maggie's DNA on there, no blood. There was also a raincoat that was brought up a lot, and there was no DNA on there as well. But why would they find the DNA anyways? Because we already think that he discarded the clothes. That's why we never find that blue seafoam shirt ever again or those Sperry shoes.
So male DNA under her fingernails, not from Paul, not from Alec Murdaugh.
The foreign DNA to her, yes, they were excluded as contributors.
They did mention that on Maggie's fingernail, there was an unknown male DNA. However, because there wasn't enough, they weren't really able to test it. But maybe they're trying to allude that, oh, maybe Maggie was having an affair and maybe that person came after her. But to me, honestly, I don't know if that really means much.
To get her nails done, it's possible that fingernails, you're picking up DNA anytime you touch an item potentially. If she did get her nails done, it's possible that somewhere at the nail salon there was DNA that she picked up under her fingernails. We can't really tell you how or when the DNA got there, but at any point in time between getting her nails done and arriving home, she could touch an object and potentially DNA from that object could be under her fingernails, or she can touch an individual and their DNA be under her fingernails in that way.
I believe you found Maggie and Alex Murdaugh's DNA on the steering wheel?
They were included as contributors.
Yes. And is that consistent with someone who has handled Margaret Murdaugh's deceased body, which is unfortunately covered in blood, and then driving the vehicle?
Can't ever tell you exactly how the DNA was deposited onto an item.
Our next witness is going to be Dr. Ellen Reamer, and she's a pathologist. She was the one that examined the bodies of both Maggie and Paul.
Do you see any evidence of any defensive wounds on Paul?
No, I did not.
No defensive wounds. So possibly was he approached by someone that he knew? At some point when she's being cross-examined by Harpootlian, it seems that he's trying to interject that there might be a possibility that it was a suicide, that Paul did it to himself, which to me doesn't make sense because how would you explain how Maggie was shot? Also, awkwardly holding a shotgun like that that doesn't make sense.
They're talking about those contact wounds. They're exploring someone using a shotgun to commit suicide, correct?
Well, frequently contact wounds do indicate a suicide, but potentially people can be shot by another also at contact range.
General Motors.
I'm a senior technical expert in advanced driver assist systems.
General Motors finally caves in, it seems, and gives us the data for Alex Murdaugh's vehicle that night. And he does not go over it now, but we'll definitely come back to this later.
Did you have a chance to listen to a kennel video in meeting with law enforcement?
I did.
And did you identify the voices on that kennel video?
I did.
Whose voices did you hear?
Paul, Maggie's, and Alex.
Dale Rogers seems like a really cool guy, but for most of his testimony, I just saw it more as a wash because there were some things that he said that was disputed by others, and it seemed kind of reasonable. So, for example, he talked about a certain way he would hang the hose, which is addressed because they think Alex Murdaugh potentially hosed himself down right after the murders. However, you see in Paul's Snapchat that the hose wasn't actually wrapped, it was on the floor.
That's the hose? Yep.
Now that hose is on the ground, isn't it?
Yes.
Not rolled up, is it?
Nope.
He also testifies about water being collected and how it's unusual for water to be collecting like that. But honestly, like there's other testimonies that just said that like, oh, you know, it was raining that night. There was also a witness that said that they saw water rolling down the roof and collecting right near Paul's area. So we don't really know if Alex Murdaugh washed himself off at the scene or not. Just not sure.
Maggie called me that day and said she was at Edisto. She had some men working on the house. And Mr. Randolph was not doing well at all, and Alec really wanted her to come home that night. She hadn't planned on it, but that he needed her to come home, and Paul was going to be there too.
That's Maggie's older sister testifying right there, and again, another person to say that Alex Murdaugh wanted both Paul and Maggie back at the Moselle property.
I did at one point ask him if Maggie had suffered, and he assured me that she did not. Now, I don't know that I think that's true. And I asked if Paul had suffered, and he said no.
Anything Alex said about whether or not he went to the kennels that night?
I personally did not talk to him about that, but he told my mom that he had dinner with Maggie and Paul, and then he took a nap, which he did. That was kind of a routine. He would lay down on the sofa at night after work and take a nap.
But he said he never went to the kennels.
Correct. He said that his number one goal was clearing Paul's name. And I thought that was so strange because my number one goal was to find out who killed my sister and Paul.
That wasn't Alex's concern, main concern?
I know he must have wanted that too, but it just, I don't know how he could have thought about anything else.
It's a really sad testimony. And again, we have another witness who said that she heard that he said he never went to the kennels that night, even though we have that video. Not only that, she thought it was kind of strange that his main goal was clearing Paul's name from the boat case, not finding who the killers were.
I had just lost two of the family members, and I felt like they were being targeted at that point. I felt like the family was being targeted.
2 months after the murders of Maggie and Paul, there's a really weird incident where someone targets Alex and he gets shot in the head. Of course, his injuries were fine. He was let go of the hospital like 3 days afterwards. However, when law enforcement were honing in on this, they found out that Alex Murdaugh had set up this weird assassination hitman thing where he tried to be assassinated on the side of the road, but we're not really sure if he was doing it, one, to actually die because he wanted his son Buster to collect the insurance money. He did admit that. Honestly, a lot of people think that it's doing it for pity. A day before, he was confronted by close friends and law firm members that he was stealing money. So it's possible that, hey, when he's getting pushed again, he's trying to garner sympathy by making it seem like he was getting attacked. And not only does it do that, and potentially this had a dual purpose of, one, him getting sympathy, and then two, making people think that, oh, the family's being targeted and that Alex Murdaugh is not the suspect. Coming up with this plot makes no sense because you're just derailing the investigators from finding the real killers. Now the investigators are going to be like, oh my God, they were targeting Alex Murdaugh as well. Now we got to look into that.
But at that point, information started coming out about some things that Alec had done financially that we had no idea about.
Maggie have a nickname for Paul?
As Little Detective.
Little Detective?
Mm-hmm.
And what did that mean?
She felt like that, always looking to make sure his dad was behaving.
And what's
pills? Prescription pain pills.
So Paul was a detective for Maggie to make sure that the dad wasn't abusing prescription pain pills. We'll come back to this one.
Do you recognize any voices on that video?
I recognize 3.
Can you tell the jury what voices you recognize?
I recognize Paul Murdaugh. I recognize Maggie Murdaugh. And I recognize Alec Murdaugh.
And when you say Alec Murdaugh, do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
That's Alex's brother-in-law saying that.
You know, we've already established.
He regrets it. But he still want to get away with it.
Did you just ask him, we've established family guns were used?
Yes, I did.
Objection's overruled.
That's them playing the interrogation video. So at this point, when the murders had already happened, the detectives wanted to meet up with Alex Murdaugh again just to get his side of the story, but he decides to go on vacation with Maggie's family. So the detectives are like, okay, fine, you know what, take your time, go get rest, let's meet up afterwards, and I'll give you some follow-up information and stuff. So Alex Murdaugh shows up in interrogation with Corey Fleming, and if you don't know who Corey Fleming is a co-conspirator of Alex Murdaugh. He's also being charged as well for all the insurance, the fraud, all the money stuff, okay? That's a whole other issue. But Alex Murdaugh shows up, and he doesn't realize that they're trying to interview him. The police were like, hey, we wanted to, just kind of catch up, give you some details. And Alex Murdaugh, he was probably alerted, but he didn't want to seem like he was getting worried, So Corey Fleming steps in and was like, oh, are you guys here to interrogate him or something? And the police were like, no, we just want to make sure that, in order for us to proceed with our investigation, we have to exclude, the close family members and friends and stuff like that. So for you to help us with the investigation, could you do that for us? And Alex Murdaugh, because he doesn't want to seem that he's guilty or anything like that, he's like, yeah, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Well, big mistake. And at this point, the investigators are trying to ask Alex certain questions, and they're trying to press him a little bit. Now, at this point, though, they did not have Paul's Snapchat video of him wearing a different outfit with the tree in the background, or they didn't have the kennel video where it had Alex Murdaugh's voice in the background when Maggie and Paul were there. Because again, remember, Alex said that he was never at the kennels that night. Additionally, though, all they had was Rogan told the investigators at this point that he heard Alex's voice in the background when he was on the phone call with Paul. So that's kind of all that they had at this point. I do want to make a point that at this point, the defense messes up so much. The defense keeps asking the witnesses questions about finance stuff, about the roadside stuff. And at some point, the judge was like, no, I'm not going to let that in. But because the defense kept pushing on with these questions, the judge was like, you know what? We're going to let it in. So what ended up happening? They ended up letting in the roadside stuff where Alex Murdaugh, 2 months after the murders, faked this fake assassination attempt. And then 2, they also allow in more of the financial fraud stuff, all because defense were asking questions that they're trying to skirt around, thinking that they wouldn't get in trouble for it.
I grant the motion to exclude this evidence at this time. Of course, as we have seen, things change. With regard to the court's earlier ruling excluding not allowing the roadside shooting incident during cross-examination, I find that the defense opened the door to all of that testimony. Court reverses its decision and will allow examination of witnesses regarding that relationship. Mr. Griffin introduced the relationship between the defendant and Eddie Smith. The court conducted a pretrial a hearing outside the presence of the jury, addressed the issue, made it clear that the roadside shooting was a bridge too far. Then the defense decided to build a road over that bridge, decided to just go right there as if they could dance through fire without getting burned, scarred, or anything.
Next testimony we have from Kenneth Kinsley. He's going to describe to us how he thinks everything happened.
In your expert opinion, is there any way that Paul's arms were raised when he suffered that first blast to the chest?
I see no possible way his arms were up. The shooter was right here. If you're facing that door, to the right of the doorway, outside. The shooter was right here, approximately right here. She would have immediately fell down with the front of her body.
All right.
And that is the position her arms were in the original crime scene photograph.
And while I'm down here so I don't have to get up again, tell me about the fatal shot and the position of the shooter as the evidence indicates to you.
The second shot was not as close, but it still wasn't a long distance. It was approximately here, into the crown of the head.
Now, the defense are going to say, well, it's kind of weird that first shot would be like this. Why would the second shot be so low to the ground when talking about Paul? Well, people think it's possible that the shooter could have walked backwards and either tripped, or maybe he was either crouching on the ground shooting upwards.
Whoever fired the first shot could have retreated or could have backed up, better word for it, could have backed up or even was taking cover to see what was going to happen. And then I believe the angle would fit or could fit that two persons could be that close to that door frame.
First shot is square into his chest. Why the second shot would be like this? I mean, we agree the normal height person would have to crouch to make that shot. So the shooter was a very short person, but here I'm not bent over that far, and I'm almost 6 foot. So what, I don't understand.
So in my opinion, it's possible that Alex Murdaugh used 2 different guns to show that maybe there's 2 different shooters at the scene. I think it's also possible that he may have wanted to manipulate his height a little bit just to show that, oh, there's shooters of different heights at the scene. Or it's also possible as well that as the second shot happened to Paul, that maybe he fell backwards and tripped and didn't realize that Paul was still alive.
I stopped. I got a flat tire, and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me. And when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
Murdaugh in an attempt to create a composite sketch of the unknown suspect.
I thought it would be better for me not to be here anymore.
What do you mean by not be here anymore?
I thought that it would make it easier on my family for me to be dead.
And easier with some financial gain to your family if you were dead?
I have a fair amount of life insurance debt.
Do you remember how much?
Not off the top of my head, but like $10 million, $12 million.
Okay. And so you decided to end your life?
That's correct.
Now, this is the mess of the roadside shooting. So again, the judge lets it in. So they have this whole other witness testimony. They got the 911 call. They got this other recorded call. That gets let in. The jury listens to that. So we find out that Alex said that he hired his cousin to do his bidding. But isn't it really weird that your cousin will be down to kill you? And without even like hardcore convincing, because Alex says that like he asked his cousin to do it, and it seems like, 30 to an hour later, the cousin does it. A person wouldn't, I feel like you wouldn't agree to something so quickly like that. This would have to be planned so far ahead. And not only that, this is a person that you've known, like why would they just agree to it without even contesting it? Kind of weird. That's why we don't believe Alex's Murdaugh's story about this. I think he was just trying to get sympathy. I don't think he was really trying to die.
No, sir. How long did it transpire between the time you asked him to shoot you in the head on the side of the road and he actually shot you in the head on the side of the road?
When I first asked him, we were at the Sunoco station in Farmville.
How long after that did he actually shoot you in the head?
However long it takes to drive from there to Talkehatchee Road.
More than half an hour?
No, I don't think so.
Did he ever ask you to reconsider or say, things aren't that bad? Did he ever, try to convince you to do otherwise?
No, sir.
You find that strange?
This last witness is the last witness that the state is going to call on to present. Now, this is going to be a really rough one for the defense because I think this one really resonated with the jury. It shows like a timeline of Maggie, Alex's, Paul, how all the times sync up, and how it's such a coincidence that a lot of things lined up to show that it was possibly Alex Murdaugh that did it. Too much coincidence, or maybe it was just because he did it.
The main focus was to take all of the various forms of data. There's, a lot of phones, a lot of different data, and take all of that and put it into a readable timeline. You see June 7th, 2021, 12:07 and 40 seconds p.m.
So again, this catches a lie that Alex Murdaugh said that he was at the law firm at 8:39, but it says right here that he left his house at 12:07.
This is 12:24:06 with no speed reported. This is when he's arriving. This is the last data point I could find.
So he's arrived at work at that time, correct?
That is correct. I'm going to represent Alex leaving work at the law firm, heading to his house. It shows at 6:24:18.
Alex Murdaugh says that he left the law firm at 5:30, but now it's showing here that he left at 6:30. Is this just a guy who's just really bad with time? Maybe.
We reflect at Alex arriving home at 6:42:54 with a miles per hour of 0. This is one of the last data points that without speed.
Alex apparently told investigators that he was hanging out with Paul the entire afternoon for a couple of hours, but we're going to see that maybe that's not true.
Suburban goes underway at what time?
9:07:06 according to this data. So the orange dot, that's going to represent approximately where Maggie Murdaugh's phone was located the following day on June 8th, 2021.
All right, and do we have a time reference for the Suburban at this time?
We do. It's going to be 9:08:36 seconds, and it's showing a speed of 42 miles an hour. And at 9:08:42, we have the Suburban traveling approximately 45 miles an hour.
After passing that location, does the defendant's vehicle start to accelerate?
It does.
So now we got the exact time that Alex leaves the house to go to his mom's house in Alameda. And you know what? Lo and behold, Alex takes the path where Maggie's phone was later found. Now, I do want to say that they mentioned that like the car accelerated right after the point where Maggie's phone was found, which is possible where it's like, maybe Alex rolled down the window, chucked Maggie's phone out. But when they were like, oh, did the car accelerate right after this? I mean, it seems like the car was already kind of accelerating anyway, so I don't really give too much to this, but it is very interesting to see that Alex's car traveled the same path where Maggie's phone was found. Wow, what a coincidence.
Where do the data points reflect the Suburban going, though, when it arrives?
The data points for the Suburban, it looks like it went toward like a little bit into the grass, closer to the wood line over here.
So now they're saying that when Alex arrived at his mom's house, well, he didn't pull up at the carport. He actually pulls up towards the back, but towards the wooded area. And they have said that towards that area, there's a shed back there. So now we're thinking, oh man, is that where he dumped the bloody guns, the clothes maybe? Because we end up not finding any of those.
And that's going to be at 9:22:39.
They also have in this data that it shows that Alex was only there for 20 minutes, exactly what the housekeeper said. Not the original 45 minutes to 60 minutes that Alex said, and not to the other changed timeline of 30 to 40 minutes. He was there for 20 minutes, just like Miss Shelley had said.
It would be the arrival into Moselle. This is showing 10 o'clock on the dot, showing 7 miles an hour, making a left into the main driveway.
So in comparing the drive records of earlier today, they saw that Alex Murdaugh didn't drive as fast as when he was driving towards his mom's house and back. Possibly maybe as if he was trying to rush back and forth to at least establish alibi. He was at his mom's house, but quickly rushed back to the crime scene and, you know, maybe do some other stuff.
We're at 6:42:48 and at 6:42:54, we show the Suburban arrives at 4147 Moselle Road based on the GM OnStar data. Catch data database, it shows that Paul Murdaugh is at the residence of 4147 Moselle Road. 55 is when this thumbnail was created in Paul's phone.
And remind the jury what video that is. I see we got a thumbnail there, but
Yep.
what video is that?
This is going to be that Snapchat video that was sent to a few friends of the tree. You have Alex Murdaugh on the tree that's leaning over.
All right. And again, this is when that video, at least the timestamp, was its creation?
That's correct, based on previous testimony, yes.
Honestly, it breaks my heart because this shows a video that Paul was taking of Alex. Again, this video is brought up because of the different outfit that Alex is wearing an hour before the supposedly murders happen. And you see them laughing. They're laughing together. The tree is blowing in the background. So it's it would make it really hard for us to believe that this type of relationship would lead to a murder about an hour later. But again, we don't know what people are capable of sometimes because people be crazy.
8:08:45 and then 8:14.
Paul's at the main residence at what time? First?
8:08:45 p.m.
So again, to reiterate, here's what we have. Alex arrives at Moselle at 6:42. It seems that Paul arrives shortly after at 7:04. Now, this disputes what Alex was saying, that he was actually spending the entire afternoon with his son. They were riding around the farm, when in reality, they were only hanging out for about an hour. But maybe, again, this guy just has a horrible sense of time, okay? So that's one thing. Another thing, so Maggie will arrive way later towards the end of the night. So Maggie arrives, I believe, roughly around 8:17. And again, remember, the family has dinner together. So I think what happened was maybe they ate just really quick because Maggie came home, they ate dinner really quick. By 8:35, they were already down at the kennels. And if you guys remember, the kennel, main house all the way to the kennels, the distance is roughly around, I think it was roughly 0.2 miles. So after they had a quick dinner, they must have quickly either rode an ATV or a car or something and all rode down to the kennels together.
At this point in time, he's at the kennels at 8:38:07 p.m., 8:44:53, 8:44:55, and 8:44:56.
Both Maggie and Paul's phone locked forever around 8:49.
They do.
Did the defendant repeatedly deny ever being at the kennels at that time period?
Yes, he did. Various interviews with law enforcement.
So they believe the murders happened between, I think, 8:54 to 9:06. What you're going to notice from this timetable next is they have the app. It's the Apple Fitness apps that tracks your steps. You're going to see a huge spike of Alex Murdaugh's activity, specifically his steps, during the supposed time of the murders. This is the time where he said, I ate dinner with the family, and then shortly after, I took a nap on the couch, never went to the kennels, and then I got in my car, went out to go see my mom. Look at these steps. It just doesn't correspond to that. Why would you be running around frantically?
28 is going to be the 8:05 to 8:09. It's showing approximately 74 steps. That's 17.28 steps per minute.
And as you testified, that was the last entry on Alex's phone before we get to the 9 o'clock hour. Is that correct?
That is correct. 8.75 steps per minute estimated.
He was a busy guy right then, wasn't he?
Cheers.
What was the average steps per minute from 9:02 to 9:06?
70.75.
Was that far in excess of any ratings on his phone in those prior entries?
According to this table, yes.
2 calls to Maggie. Does the Suburban just take a quick right and go down this road right there to the kennels, or does it just continue straight on?
It just continues straight on.
Doesn't stop by the kennels for a second, does it? Does it stop by the kennels?
His vehicle does not stop by the kennels.
Keeps right on going.
It's right on going to Moselle Road, makes a right.
So you call your wife because your dad's in the hospital, your mom is still really sick, but when you decide to go visit your mom, you don't bring your wife with you because she doesn't answer her phone calls. Well, why not just stop by the kennels and just pick her up?
Bourbon arrives at the kennels and he calls 911.
Roughly 20 seconds.
20 seconds? He said that when he arrived at the scene, he went over to check their pulses. So Paul was flipped over. He said he tried to flip over Paul's body twice, but Paul's phone fell out. He took the phone and placed it on his behind. And then he tried to check Maggie's pulse and then calls 911. Like, honestly, you doing that in 20 seconds, I think that time frame is just way too tight. If it was like maybe like, I don't know, maybe 45 seconds, maybe I could believe it. But 20 seconds just seems really short. It's as if when he arrived, he already knew what was up and just called 911 right away. Seriously doubt he checked their pulses.
20 seconds.
That's correct. Defendant stated that he went and checked on Paul and Maggie to check the bodies.
And from the moment the Suburban arrived at the kennels, how long did it take for that 911 call to be made?
Less than 20 seconds.
Now they revisit some old text messages between Paul and Alex. And this is basically Paul confronting his father about pills that his mom had found. Not only that, we have the search history of Maggie because she was Googling what kind of damn pills these were.
Still an EB because when you get here, we need to talk. Mom found several bags of pills in your computer bag. This is again from Paul. May 26, 2021 at 11:21 p.m. Maggie searched green gel pill P30. She also searched 11:20 p.m. Green gel pill P30.
We find out that Alex, after calling 911, he calls his two brothers, but the third call is a little bit weird. He calls Rogan Gibson. Now, Rogan Gibson is the guy who was trying to get a hold of Paul Murdaugh the entire time because there was an issue with the dog. They want to check out the dog's tail. It's possible that Alex Murdaugh saw Rogan continuously calling his dead son's phone and he wanted to call him and see what was up. Maybe if he knew anything. Because maybe he was getting paranoid, like, oh, why would Rogan Gibson be calling Paul so much? Or maybe it's because Rogan maybe knows something, or maybe Paul was actually on his phone. I need to know what's going on. I need to figure out what Rogan knows and talk to him right away. Because, you know, it's kind of weird to me that, honestly, you guys forget that he also has another son named Buster. Well, if your immediate family died, why wouldn't you call the other immediate family Buster right away? Why call your two brothers? And then for your third call, why call your son's best friend? Why not just call your other son Buster? I don't know. That to me is just kind of weird. I feel like Buster would have priority over Paul's friend.
So as an investigator, do you think it would be terribly unreasonable that after calling other family members, someone would call the person who is the best friend of the dead son, who had multiple missed messages and calls, and even a call coming in during the 911 call? Is calling that person to ask what happened, what's going on, is that, to you as an investigator, an unreasonable thing to do after calling other family members?
I would, as an investigator, I think that would be very odd given the scene and the whole situation that you're on the phone constantly, yes.
That you're standing there next to your dead son, his phone is ringing with someone, and you call that person after calling other people.
Yes, because I am standing over my son and wife, and it's just witnessing that for the first time. I would think that would be, to have someone on their phone constantly like that, right after, given the scene and the situation, yes, as an investigator, I would think that is very
It wouldn't be someone trying to find out what happened.
At that moment, that would be the last thing that would probably come through my mind as an investigator, looking at the scene, is trying to figure out what happened minutes after I discover it. I'd be in a state of shock if that was me personally.
And speaking of a state of shock, you have in the timeline later on, he reads some spam text message about, I think there's a picture of a woman in a bikini.
I wouldn't call it a spam text message. It's from Michael Gunn.
Yeah, this part is just really weird because it's funny how the defense tries to downplay a spam message. No, Alex Murdaugh is in a group text message with his friends. One of his friends sends a picture of a hot girl over, and they're at this bar or something. And what does Alex Murdaugh do?
It would be one of his friends.
A group text.
A group text, yeah.
And then he Googles the name of a restaurant in Edisto Beach. Is that correct?
That is what comes up on his phone extraction.
Doesn't he also call?
That's what the data shows.
So he would seem to be in a state of shock. None of that makes any sense, does it? You're not going to Google the name of a restaurant after you find your son murdered.
I'm not Alex Murdaugh. I don't know what he was thinking at that moment. Probably wouldn't be on my phone.
Really? You wouldn't be calling family?
I might be calling family, but I wouldn't be.
The testimony was that Rogan was family.
If you ask a question, if you want him to answer, you have to give an opportunity to answer. Proceed.
I would not be Googling and doing other things with my phone, no.
You think he was, do you believe he was Googling a restaurant, or do you think he was fat fingering the phone because he was in shock?
I have to go off of the data, and that's what the data shows.
And you believe that calling family and calling someone that the prior testimony was like another son is unreasonable in the circumstances?
I would say so, yes. Given the fact that you just arrived to the scene, yes.
And that's where we wrap up. That is the second half of the prosecution's case. Next will be the defense. They're going to present their witnesses, and we're going to see, maybe they'll have something convincing that's going to offset some of the testimonies here. And maybe they'll have an explanation as to why Alex Murdaugh was at a certain place at this time, why his voice was in the background, the Snapchat, where his clothes are. I don't know. There's a lot of things to address. But yeah, I did a similar video of this for day 2 to day 12. So if you guys haven't seen that, go watch it right here. But other than that, this is the second half of the prosecution. What do you guys think? Do you think that they have an open and shut case for Alex Murdaugh? Do you think he's guilty? Do you think he's not guilty? Do you think it might be a hung jury? Really want to know what your guys' opinions are. We are live streaming this trial. If you guys want to come watch it live with the rest of us, I start about 9:30 my time. I usually start where we leave off, and then when they go for their very long 1 hour plus lunch breaks, we go back and watch the highlights of the previous testimonies and things like that. So feel free to stop by during the live stream.